Okay, so, I've talked about this before. So we know that the Southern Poverty Law Center, along with some groups of women, came together a few years ago and had MGTOW and their rhetoric classified as hate speech. And black women in Divested and BWE spaces have spent the better part of a decade warning other black women and the society at large that this type of anti-woman speech that has been directed at black women is very dangerous because they could be potential breeding grounds for men who feel rejected to go out and feel justified in being violent against black women, okay? And when those conversations are had in these spaces, we're often told that we're being too sensitive and that we need to learn how to receive what people call correction and guidance, right? So even when we see these stories that go viral on social media showing, black girls being brutally beaten by their dads for simply dancing on Facebook, or black girls being dragged out of their seats by security officers, or being body slammed to the ground by fully grown men who are police officers, or being punched in the face by fully grown men at 11 or 12 years old. When we see all of these stories, the response is basically that other people feel that those black girls or black women deserved what happened to them. And the reason that so many other people feel that way is because this anti-woman speech, this anti-black woman speech, has painted us as an evil other and has stripped us of our humanity. And so when people don't see you as human, when they don't see you as a woman who is feminine, and when they take you and the group that you're a part of and present these images that are very hyper masculine, or they use terms like hyena or other animalistic terms to describe you, then it makes other people feel like they can beat up on you because they don't see your humanity. This is why you have so many black men on social media and the women who support them who can be completely dismissive about the domestic violence and the sexual abuse that black women deal with. Well, now MGTOW and the overall manosphere is in the media because of Dayton, Ohio, El Paso, Texas, and the shooting in California that took place approximately a week ago. And the manosphere has been connected to those events because, as in the case of the majority of mass shootings, the men connected to those shootings were men who, would be called incels or like red-pilled guys. So there are men who were very much supporters of the manosphere. The shooter in Dayton, Ohio actually had a list of women who he felt had rejected him, and his plan was to sexually assault them to get back at them. Okay? So now the overall society is having this kind of debate about what they're calling neo-masculinity. And neo-masculinity encompasses the incelosphere, these men's rights groups, pickup artists, and even some men's fashion blogs. Although a lot of those blogs are not as openly hateful, right? But yeah, the country's having a national conversation about something that divested black women and black women in BWE spaces have been saying for the better part of a decade, which is a lot of these men in these spaces may go out and create mayhem in the societies or communities that they're a part of. You understand, they've even done studies now that show that over the last 8 or 9 years or so, the majority of these mass shootings have been related to some form of domestic and family violence. And it makes sense because a lot of the violence that takes place in communities with a lot of black people are connected to domestic and family violence. But notice, when black women talk about the violence we face, what are we told? We're told, well, if you think black men are violent, it's because black women are raising them. So is anyone in the mainstream media going to look at the mothers of these men who shot up Dayton, Ohio, El Paso, Texas, and that festival in California and say, oh, those men are violent because of their mothers? No one's going to do that. And when you see these other incels who have gone out and literally killed women that they felt rejected by, no one looks at those men's mothers and says, well, you're responsible for the behavior of your adult male child. No one does it. You know why? Because their mothers aren't black. So their mothers have not been made out to be some sort of evil other who has no humanity. So just sit back and watch what happens over the next couple of months, ladies. Because see, we've talked before about how black men are not race loyal, because if they were race loyal, they would have never connected themselves to any male-centered movement that's openly racist and alt-right. They would have never been openly hoping that Donald Trump won specifically because they wanted to use him to attack black women. They thought, oh, if we get a Republican president, then all of these horrible things will happen to black women and black children. You had black men on social media saying that with a Republican president, black women would be so cash strapped. Those black men thought that they could get sexual favors from black women that they view as attractive for as little as $5. That's what these Negroes were saying on social media. But now that the general public is calling out the entire incelosphere, aka manosphere, see how quickly you'll see some of these guys start to run away from the manosphere. And when you see it, just sit back and observe it. But never forget that black men connected to those spaces hate black women so much that they had no problem aligning with a movement that's associated with the alt-right. They had no problem aligning themselves with movements that were openly racist, because they would connect to anything and anyone that they thought would hurt black women. And also look at these other races of women and see whether or not they'll look around and say, oh, well, you guys need to stop being so sensitive. Because, these men just want to have a voice like they did when they set up in these spaces with black men who were spewing rhetoric against us. See, maybe more of these other races of women will understand that, okay, when you have an entire movement that's anti-woman, you're going to have certain elements in those movements who are going to be very reactionary, and they're going to be very violent, and some of those men are going to go out and they're going to use the rhetoric in those spaces as an excuse to be violent, not only against women, but to be violent in general. Okay? So sit back, ladies, and watch. Watch how nobody will look at any of these mass shooters who don't have a black mother and blame the mothers for their behaviors. And let's see what comes out of this. Let's see what happens in the next few months. Let's see how many of these black men will run away from the manosphere and say, oh no, this doesn't represent who I am. Just watch, ladies. Just watch.